everyone, Beth Sager here with the Lex Local, and today we are interviewing Patrick Mehr, who is running for Select Board. Now,
Thank you, Beth.
yes, tell us why you're running for Select Board. Let's start there.
Well, I thought perhaps I should start very briefly by saying who I am.
Okay.
I was born and educated in France, and I went to the equivalent of MIT, so I'm a numbers person.
Gotcha.
But I am married to an author and journalist,
All right.
so that's helpful to understand people better. I moved to Cambridge, Massachusetts about 40 some years ago, and 25 years ago, when it was time for our older son, we have two sons, to go to the high school, I did some research. And when I visited the LHS science department, it became completely clear to me that we had to move to Lexington.
Oh, okay.
So like most people, we moved to Lexington for the schools. And I have to say that the schools have done a superb job on our two sons. Mm-hmm. One went into science, as we thought he would, and the other one went into music.
Oh,
and he's
nice.
now a researcher trying to figure out why music exists in humans, which is an
Interesting.
interesting question. So I got involved very quickly because I was walking around the neighborhood here in Woodhaven, including in the conservation land. When I would come out of the conservation land, I noticed that builders were doing tear downs and were basically mowing down the trees as if they were blades of grass. And I thought that frankly didn't make sense because that's part of the character of the town.
Right.
And it helps our health, and I feel like my mental health is far better because of the trees. And so I found myself on the then tree committee. This was literally in 2000.
All right.
And the tree committee, with my help, wrote the very first tree bylaw in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts that provided some protection for trees. Mm-hmm. And then somebody on the committee said, Patrick, if you really want the tree bylaw to be approved by the town meeting, you should join town meeting. At which point I said, what's town meeting? And the rest is history. So I ended up serving for 15 years in town meeting between 2000 and 2015. Mm-hmm. And I learned a lot there. Mm-hmm. I worked with lots of people. I discovered what the Appropriation Committee does, which is our most important financial committee.
Right.
I studied the budget very closely. And I would say for listeners that today the town budget is about $300 million in round numbers. Of that, 80% is for the schools.
Wow.
And only 20% is for what we call municipal services, which means police, fire, Department of Public Works, etc. And of that big pot of $300 million, we, the taxpayers, supply about 80% of that. Mm-hmm. And so it's important to keep these numbers in mind, especially the fact that the schools represent 80% of our budget. Mm. So after 15 years in town meeting, I got back to my retirement interest, which is to publish books that interest me as electronic books on Kindle, etc. It's part of my kind of adult education, as I call it, because as a professional in France, as a civil servant in the French government dealing with very technical issues, I did not have much time to read anything else than technical memos. So now I get to do that until I get interested again in town affairs. And this happened literally last fall. I had certainly heard about the MBTA rezoning that occurred in April of 2023. I was surprised that the town did what it did, but didn't know much. To summarize, we obviously have a housing crisis in the Boston area,
Right.
and it needs to be solved. So the state did a very smart thing, which is to pass the MBTA Communities Act, which basically says each and every city and town that enjoys MBTA service, be it buses, subways, ferries, etc., shall dedicate a certain area, in the case of Lexington, 50 acres, to more dense housing, so that developers can build it without having to go through endless rules that will limit their ability to do so. So that's a perfectly reasonable way to do it. For reasons I still don't understand, town meeting did 4.5 times that, 228 acres instead of 50. And in November of 2023, which is now almost a year and a half ago, the state notified officially the town that the zoning on 228 acres could double the population of this town. And town government in Lexington didn't react, as far as I can tell. It's clear to me, we have now, as everybody knows, 6 elementary schools, 2 middle schools, and a high school. If we double the population of the town in 5, 10, 15 years, once all this 228 acres are developed, where are we going to build another 6 elementary schools,
Right.
another 2 middle schools, and the second high school?
Right.
And even more importantly, who's going to pay for that? We, the taxpayers, pay for this. And what I'm going to try and explain in a few minutes is that it's just impossible, given the compact that today exists between single-family homes and apartment buildings, to fund our town budget and the schools. We would be simply unable to balance the budget. And so I'm running because I feel it's so important to preserve the quality of our schools and the character of the town, including the trees that helps with our good health,
Right.
and certainly with mine. And again, the schools that did such a superb job for my 2 sons. I'm running because I don't want to see such major mistakes made again in the future. And the way to avoid that, in my view, is to do something that town government has done far too little of in the past. And that is long-range financial planning of our budgets as impacted by major decisions that town government or town meeting takes, such as rezoning 4.5 times more than what
Right.
the state required.
Is there any, do you think there's a rollback on that?
Well, people became aware of this problem
Right.
because I developed some mathematics that show that this is simply unsustainable. And thankfully, we will have a special town meeting to roll it back. The
that's a
problem
lot.
is that it took only 50% of town meeting to pass the 228 acres. It will take 2/3 of town meeting to roll it back. So I sure hope that town meeting members, especially the new ones who will be elected on March 3rd, when I hope to be elected to the select board, will understand that 228 acres is simply impossible to sustain.
Right.
So the reason I'm very sensitive to these issues is that professionally I worked for several years at the Boston Consulting Group. So my approach to things is to think strategically, because there are hidden impacts in the future
Right.
that cannot be seen if you just look at, as town government today does in Lexington, at this year's budget, next year's, and maybe 3 years out.
Right.
We need to look further out for major decisions.
Right.
And other important decisions we're in the process of taking is to build, to renovate, or to improve the current LHS, Lexington High School, which is obviously overcrowded and needs to be addressed. And so, in my view, the path we're on is not the optimal path. What the town wants to do so far, without enough input from the public, is to build, at the cost of $2/3 billion, a new building that would be in the fields, which, in my view, is something that's very important to the town, the open space we have
Right.
right near the high school. And so it would be a very expensive building that would be in the fields and that would be sized for fewer students than we have this year. 30 fewer students. So I simply don't understand why we would want to build for 70 years, which is typically the amount of time that a new building will last for us,
Right.
a structure that can accommodate fewer students than we have now, when we know that the new MBTA dwellings will bring more students to the high school. So that's the second problem that I want to work on. The third issue, which people can read more details about on my website, which is patrick4lex.org, with the number 4 in the middle, is that we need to institute, as I said, long-range financial and strategic thinking and planning about all of our decisions. The fourth point that is important to me is that I want to see our real estate taxes be more fair and more progressive. And there's a way to do this, which Concord implemented just last year, and that's called the residential exemption. What that would do is it would lower the taxes on the smaller houses, the ones that are assessed below the median value, which is about 1.4 million right now, and the higher assessed houses would see an increase in their taxes, so that the town as a whole would continue to collect the 80% of the $300 million
Right.
from us collectively, all taxpayers. And finally, number 5, and I do know a lot about this because, again, I wrote the original tree bylaw. Unfortunately, for all sorts of reasons, the enforcement of the tree bylaw has become too lax. And more importantly, the tree bylaw itself does not today protect all major trees. And in my view, because a builder wants to build a new $3 million home, or because a homeowner, wants less shade or doesn't want to rake the acorns every year, that's not a good enough reason, in my view, to cut down a tree that may be 50 or 100 years old and that's majestic and important. Just like I presume somebody who lives across the Minuteman statue and doesn't like the shade that it provides at certain times of the day wouldn't come forward and say, take it out.
Right.
So that's the 5th item that I would like to work on.
All very pressing and important.
Thank you.
So,
I do think so.
yeah. No. Well, we wish you good luck
Thanks.
in your endeavor.